RP calling in regard to a male by the name of John. Albers location.
On January 20th, 2018, in Overland Park, Kansas, police responded to calls about a teenager threatening to kill himself.
He also told the RP that he was going to stab himself and he's done with life.
About 4 minutes after arriving at the scene, Officer Clayton Jennison shoots 13 rounds at a minivan backing out of a garage. Hitting 17-year-old John Albers 6 times and killing him. One month later, the Johnson County District Attorney announced his charging decision.
Under Kansas law, we have deemed, based on the facts and the law, that this is justified use of force.
4 years later, the shooting is under investigation by the Justice Department. Police in America shoot and kill roughly 1,000 people every year, according to a Washington Post database. The public almost never sees how police investigate other officers. But in this case, the release of the entire case file and corresponding visuals gives us a rare look inside one of these investigations.
Ready to couch?
The investigation was conducted by a team of officers from other departments in Johnson County, Kansas.
Clayton, I'm Detective Jason Aring with the Leawood, Kansas Police Department.
Known as the Officer Involved Shooting Investigation Team, or OISIT. No one associated with this case agreed to speak to the Post, despite multiple requests for comment. The Post examined the nearly 500-page, partially redacted OISIT report and shared it with 5 law enforcement experts. They said the investigation favored Officer Jennison's perception of events, a common reality in officer-involved shootings.
They seem to start with the assumption that this was what they'd call in law enforcement parlance a good shooting.
We recreated the shooting in a 3D space to trace the location of Officer Jennison in relation to the minivan. The model showed he was to the side of the van when he fired the 13 shots. We also spoke to John Albers' parents about their son, the investigation, and how they obtained additional documents. Documents that were not included in the report. The public case file provides an unusual opportunity to see how police investigated an officer who shot and killed a teenager. The Post's analysis reveals an investigation that missed critical steps recommended by county protocols and the law enforcement experts who reviewed the case. John Albers was a 17-year-old high school junior. He lived in Overland Park with his parents and 2 younger brothers.
John was intense. Like, he loved his family and his friends very, very deeply. He was an all-in. He was either all in or all out. I mean, that's why he was a great goalie. He could come flying out of a soccer goal 90 miles an hour. People could be kicking at his head, and he just didn't care because he was gonna get the ball.
On January 20th, 2018, Albers was renewing his soccer referee certification at a local sporting goods store. While on a break, he was caught shoplifting.
He had been on kind of a roller coaster ride of emotions over the last year, especially the last month. Huge ups, huge downs.
The incident, along with Albers' prior interactions with law enforcement, were outlined throughout the investigative file.
I had to pick him up from the police, brought him home. That night we had plans with my cousin who was in town. He said he didn't feel like going out, he wanted to be by himself.
Albers wrote in his journal about the shoplifting and how there was way too much to come back from.
We left the house at about 5:10 that day, my husband, I, and our other 2 boys. We weren't very far away, maybe 20 minutes away.
Around 5:36 p.m., Overland Park Dispatch Center received 911 calls from Albers' friends. His friends said Albers was on Snapchat and FaceTime saying he was going to kill himself.
When he posted that stuff on social media, his friends did the appropriate thing and they called 911 because they wanted to make sure John was safe.
2 officers, Officer Ryan Newland and Officer Jennison, responded to the call. They were both fairly new to the force.
Do you have any prior law enforcement experience?
No, I had a prior military experience.
Okay.
The history of the cop is really important. It'll never be heard in court, but it's important in making a decision.
Jennison's police personnel file is not mentioned in the investigative file. Personnel files generally include use of force records, complaints, or any disciplinary actions. It's not known to the public if Jennison had any of those. Jennison's 4 years of active duty in the Army are also not examined. He served tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan. His police training records are 7 pages in the file. Albers' background, including his juvenile and medical records, takes up over 100 pages, more than 1/5 of the investigative file.
Their investigation seemed to be focused on this was a troubled youth who was a danger to law enforcement. So that's victim blaming. To answer these questions about the officer's conduct, we don't need to know any more about the young man's mental health history because we just need to know what the officer knew at that time.
This kid has run from us before. He was a wrestler. He's always bragging out here to fight us.
This comment about Albers from Adam Vendetti, another officer who responded to the call, is not heard in Jennison's dashcam audio recording.
You respond to the scene, and as you're responding, does dispatch provide you any type of information?
They provide stating that he has been cutting himself and threatens to stab himself, and I believe that's all the information they gave us.
Had you responded there before, or were you familiar with that address?
I haven't, sir.
Jennison arrived at the scene around 5:47 p.m., shortly after Newland.
Officer Newland was going back to get a patrol phone. I was standing behind a tree that was in the front yard.
Dashcam video shows Jennison does not announce himself as a police officer before firing his first round of shots.
He hasn't properly identified himself, which is clear police training. You have to tell him who you are.
As I'm moving towards the garage, the door opens. Try to contain that situation, not let him leave so we could help him. That's why I got in the back of the car.
Experts call Jennison's movement officer-created jeopardy. That's when an officer places himself in danger and then uses deadly force to get out of the situation.
I would have been asking him about his training for these kind of situations. Why did he step in back of the vehicle?
Some of the experts said they would have questioned Jennison more extensively about his training, why he stepped behind the van, and his decision to fire.
From my memory, it felt it was going fast enough to be a threat and to cause bodily harm to me.
One of the things that cops lay their everything on is Graham versus Connor. It kind of protects the officer to some degree if he can say that he can reasonably articulate that he was in fear of his life.
According to that Supreme Court decision, a reasonable officer's perception when using force is a determining factor in whether they are charged or not.
We're not treating him as a criminal because he, by virtue of both societal interests and the law, has been given the power and authority to use force when reasonable.
The video shows Jennison stepping towards the vehicle as it reverses out of the driveway. He then moves away from the van and fires 2 shots.
As soon as I
hit that intersection, and I saw the garage door was open, and I see Jennison assuming a shooting stance. Like I said, I didn't know if John was there standing with the knife in some sort of posture. I had no idea what was going on inside the garage because my angle wasn't good enough. All I saw was that the van came out, and then like within seconds, the first couple of shots, you hear me go, "What the fuck?" And I just slammed my car. I lurched forward.
When you look at those excited utterances of the responding officers, that is quite telling, I think, in terms of a reasonable officer. They just couldn't believe what they were seeing.
A forensic expert hired by the Albers family after the charging decision determined the vehicle was moving about 2.5 miles per hour, slower than the average speed of a pedestrian. Albers likely released the brake and allowed the van at idle speed to roll backward, the expert said. There is no forensic analysis in the OISIT file that attempted to determine the speed of the van. After Jennison fires 2 rounds at the vehicle, the minivan stops. It then continues in reverse and does a J-turn. The media fact sheet released by the district attorney describes those moments as, in a split second, the officer went from a position of safety to once again being directly in the path of the van that was accelerating toward him.
How are you positioned in reference to the vehicle?
From what I remember, sir, I'm positioned right between the wheels, dead center in the front and the back of the vehicle.
The Post's 3D reconstruction and dash cam videos show Jennison was directly behind the van before he stepped out of its path and fired the second round of shots from the side.
Fearing that he was going to try to hit me again, I fired my second time.
His statement to the police about the second half of the shooting is just not true. There's no way that car can hit him.
At the press conference where the district attorney announced that Jennison would not be charged with a crime, a reporter asked about how Jennison's position while firing factored into the charging decision.
I think it's well established that a vehicle can be a deadly weapon.
According to the Post's 3D reconstruction, Jennison was to the side of the vehicle during the first and second rounds of shots. Of the 13 shots Jennison fired, 6 hit Albers. He died at the scene from gunshot wounds to his head and chest, according to the autopsy report.
Do we know what's going on? He was suicidal. He tried to run over an officer. Okay.
They're framing the narrative. Police own the narrative in these situations.
I jumped out of the car and I ran down the street. And there were lights and sirens and a ton of law enforcement there, and the officer stopped me and I said, "Is my son okay?" And he said, "No, he's passed." I remember just feeling very powerless at the time because we were sitting there waiting to get information about John and nothing happened.
I want to see him.
Okay, we're talking about that, okay? We have to...
You're going to be able to see him before he's transported?
I can't give you a 100% answer about that.
Okay.
Just yet. We got to do some checking, okay?
I was worried about our youngest boys who were still in the car on the corner. And I wanted to go, make sure that they were okay and let them know that their brother had passed away. And I remember I crawled in the back seat and was talking to the boys and told them that John had passed away and that he had committed suicide, which is what really I was led to believe. And Patrick, my youngest, was like, "No, John wouldn't have done that." And I was like, John was hurting, sometimes you don't know. And he's like, "No, I know, because John promised me he was gonna hang out with me tomorrow, and John always keeps his promises." And it kind of struck me. I went to the police officer at the top of the street and I said, "Why can't I see my son?" And he had mentioned something about, waiting for a team to arrive. And I was like, who were they and why do they need to be here? And he said that it's standard protocol in an officer-involved shooting. And that was the first time anybody had mentioned a gun.
John's OISIT investigation was completed in 6 days.
It's too rushed. We don't even complete the homicide investigations in 6 days. These OISs require much more just by virtue of the societal impact of an OIS. It demands a thoughtful, deliberate, patient process.
Detectives, even if they're from a different police department, when they interview, they still have this kind of, we're all part of the same team mentality.
I sent an email to the attorney in Overland Park, and I said, these are the things that I see that are missing. There's no scene diagram, there is no walkthrough, there's no trajectory report, things that would be in an investigative file in a homicide. They're not there.
Through a records request, Sheila Albers learned that a scene diagram, what some experts say is typically a routine part of an investigation, was not requested by the OISIT team.
I have no idea why a crime scene diagram wasn't done or provided. I don't care whether it's the shooting or it's a homicide. You have to have it.
The Johnson County OISIT protocols suggest a complete walkthrough of the scene with the officer. The investigators did not do one with Jennison.
When officers are involved in these on-duty shootings, oftentimes it seems that the responding officers, investigators, police chief, the prosecutor, everybody starts with a different set of assumptions. They seem to start with the assumption that this was what they'd call in law enforcement parlance, a good shooting.
The charging decision was announced a month after the shooting. 15 days later, the Johnson County Sheriff completed the crime scene report. It included a shooting reconstruction and outlined the trajectory of the bullets.
I saw some diagrams, photographs, but I didn't see a lot of analysis in there.
As a parent, I felt I deserved some of the facts. I needed specifics on what occurred that night.
In April 2018, the Albers filed an excessive force lawsuit against Jennison and Overland Park. The city moved to dismiss the suit, arguing Albers was a lethal threat to both Jennison and the public. U.S. District Judge Daniel Crabtree denied Overland Park's motion to dismiss, stating, "A reasonable jury could conclude that deadly force was unreasonable because Albers only posed harm to himself, because Albers never had expressed a present intention to harm others." 3 months later, the city paid a $2.3 million settlement to the Albers family with no admission of wrongdoing.
I think the whole OISIT process was put into place to really support the police. And while I'm not anti-police at all, I know that what they do is very hard and they put their life on the line every day. But, at the end of the day, when you do a job and you do it wrong, there are consequences. And there should be consequences for a police officer that does something wrong.